Lena moved quietly through the large event hall, carrying a tray of glasses as if it were a part of her. She worked like someone who had learned to stay unnoticed, someone who knew how to move without disturbing anyone. Most people who came to the Upscale venue never even looked at the servers. They were too busy talking about business, showing off expensive clothes, or taking pictures of their evening. To them, the waitstaff was simply part of the background. And Lena accepted that. She didn't complain. She didn't draw attention. She just did her job. She had been working at the venue for almost a year. It was one of the most expensive places in the city, a place that hosted fancy dinners, charity events, and celebrations for people who lived in a completely different world than she did. When she first started, she felt nervous and out of place. The chandeliers, the polished floors, the marble walls, the quiet piano music playing from speakers, everything felt too grand for someone like her. But over time, she learned how to blend in, how to walk with confidence even when she felt tired, and how to smile politely even when her feet hurt. Each shift was long, often stretching late into the night. She didn't have much choice, though. She needed the money. Rent, groceries, bills. They didn't wait for dreams. They didn't care how exhausted she was. Life had taught her early that she had to work hard if she wanted to survive. So she woke up early, took the bus to the venue, tied her hair back neatly, put on her black uniform, and tried her best to look calm and professional. What no one in the hall knew was that before this job, before the tray and the uniform and the long shifts, Lena had once imagined a completely different future for herself. When she was younger, she had fallen in love with music. The sound of a piano had been like magic to her. She could remember the first time she touched one, the smooth keys, the soft sound that came from her fingertips. She was just a kid then, sitting in a small community center where an old piano stood forgotten in a corner. She tried pressing a few keys, and the noise echoed through the room. Something inside her lit up. It felt warm, exciting, full of possibilities. From that day on, she spent every spare moment with that piano. She learned by watching others, by listening, by practicing the same notes over and over until her fingers understood the movement, even when her mind was tired. Music became her comfort, her escape, her dream. She wished she could go to music school, wished she could perform on a real stage someday. She imagined herself in a beautiful gown, playing a grand piano while an audience listened in silence. She imagined applause, lights, a future full of music. But dreams like that required money. Lessons weren't free. Instruments weren't cheap. And life didn't give her a gentle path. When her family started struggling financially, everything changed. Bills piled up, and suddenly the idea of spending time on music felt selfish. She stopped going to the community center. She picked up small jobs instead, babysitting, cleaning, helping at local shops. The piano keys turned into a memory, something she tried not to think about because it hurt too much. By the time she was old enough to live on her own, she had convinced herself that music was just a childhood fantasy, something meant for other people, people who had support, money, connections. She didn't have any of that. She had reality. She had responsibilities. So she let the dream go, or at least she pretended she did. But every time she heard a piano, even just a simple tune playing from speakers in the background, something stirred inside her. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet ache, a tiny reminder of who she wanted to be once. She would pause for a second, listen, then force herself to move on. At the venue, no one knew any of this. To her coworkers, she was simply the quiet one, the girl who worked hard, didn't complain, and always offered to help. She wasn't the type to gossip or talk about her personal life. She listened more than she spoke. When others joked or chatted during breaks, she smiled politely but often stayed silent. Not because she didn't like them. She just didn't know how to explain the pieces of her life that felt too heavy or too private. Her manager saw her as dependable, someone who would show up on time, follow rules, and never cause problems. He liked employees who didn't make a fuss, and Lena fit that image perfectly. Guests, on the other hand, barely looked at her. When she approached with a tray, they reached for a glass without making eye contact. Some waved her away without a word. Some talked over her head as if she wasn't standing there at all. It wasn't personal. It was just the way things were in that kind of environment. Still, Lena didn't let bitterness take root in her heart. She wasn't angry at anyone. She had learned to accept that people lived in different worlds. The guests lived in one world, a world of luxury, confidence, and power. She lived in another, a world of quiet struggle, careful choices, and long hours. She didn't envy them. She simply did what she needed to do. On some evenings, when the venue was preparing for a major event, the staff would talk excitedly about the special guests or the performers that were expected to arrive. Singers, speakers, musicians, people who were talented, admired, and recognized. Sometimes a live pianist would be hired to play, filling the hall with soft, elegant music. Whenever a real pianist was present, Lena tried not to watch, but her eyes would drift toward the stage anyway. She would see their fingers glide across the keys, their posture relaxed, their expression focused, and she would feel a strange mix of emotions, admiration, longing, and a little sadness. She would imagine what it might feel like to sit at a real grand piano again, to let her fingers move across keys, to create sound instead of silence. But she always shook the thought away. That wasn't her life anymore. Despite everything, there was something gentle and hopeful about her nature. She believed that kindness mattered, even if no one noticed. When a coworker struggled with a task, she quietly offered help. When a guest dropped a napkin or seemed confused, she stepped in calmly without making a scene. She didn't need praise. She just wanted to do things right. Outside of work, her life was simple. She lived in a small apartment with just enough space for a bed, a tiny kitchen, and a window that looked out onto the street. On her days off, she rested, cleaned, and sometimes watched music performances online, secretly, quietly, like someone holding a fragile memory. She never told anyone she could play. It felt strange to talk about a skill she no longer used. It felt like talking about a version of herself that no longer existed. The truth was, she hadn't touched a real piano in years. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid. Afraid that she had forgotten how. Afraid that her fingers would feel stiff, that the music wouldn't come back, that she would disappoint even herself. It was easier to pretend the dream was gone than to test it and find out she had lost it. But deep inside, a small part of her still believed in that dream. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, patient, buried beneath layers of responsibility and doubt. Like a tiny flame protected in a dark corner, it flickered silently, waiting. Every day at the venue felt the same. She arrived, changed into her uniform, tied her apron, and prepared for another long event. But even in the routine, there was a calm acceptance in her. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't expect anything extraordinary. She simply hoped for steady work, peaceful days, and maybe, someday, a chance to feel connected to music again, even if only as a listener. What she didn't know was that life sometimes changes without warning. Sometimes, when a person believes they are invisible, fate has a way of placing them in the very spotlight they never expected. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories, and Lena's story was only just beginning. The evening air was calm outside the venue, but inside, everything felt alive and buzzing with anticipation. Tonight was different from the usual events. The staff had been preparing for days. It was a grand gala, one of those nights where everyone who mattered seemed to be attending. The kind of night that made ordinary people feel small just by walking through the doors. Guests were arriving in luxurious cars, dressed in gowns and suits that shimmered under the lights. They moved with confidence, talking in low voices that carried authority and charm. It was an entirely different world, one that Lena had grown accustomed to observing, but never feeling a part of. She had arrived early, as usual, carrying her tray and slipping through the polished floors. Her uniform fit her perfectly, a black apron tied neatly around her waist. Every shift, she told herself she had to look professional, no matter how tired she was, no matter how heavy her day had already been. Tonight, she moved with the practiced calm of someone who had walked these halls hundreds of times, serving drinks, offering napkins, answering polite questions, and maintaining a smile that had become second nature. The venue was decorated in shades of gold and cream, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and soft candles on each table. A large stage stood at the front of the hall, with a polished grand piano in the center, covered with a velvet cloth. Lena's eyes drifted toward it for a moment, and she felt a quiet tug inside her chest, the familiar ache that came whenever she saw a piano. Her fingers itched for the keys, but she forced them to relax, pressing them against the edge of her tray instead. It wasn't the time. She reminded herself of that. Tonight, her role was simple: serve, move quietly, and stay invisible. The staff hustled around, double-checking tables, arranging glasses, adjusting plates, and coordinating with each other to make sure the event would go perfectly. There was an energy in the air, a mix of excitement and tension. Lena noticed the performers arriving too. Musicians with their instruments, elegantly dressed, carrying themselves with confidence that came from years of practice and recognition. She watched them from the corner of her eye, her heart quietly longing for that kind of freedom, that kind of presence. She reminded herself again that it was someone else's world. Guests began filing into the hall, filling the space with laughter, conversation, and the soft clinking of glasses. Waiters moved swiftly between tables, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Lena's tray was full, balancing perfectly as she navigated through clusters of people. She overheard fragments of conversations, discussions about business deals, art collections, vacations, charity donations. Everything seemed so important, so refined, and yet distant, as if it belonged to a story she could only watch from the outside. A small group gathered near the stage, and Lena noticed the attention shifting toward the velvet-covered piano. The scheduled pianist was supposed to perform soon, filling the room with melodies that would set the tone for the entire evening. Lena had seen this happen at previous events. The pianist would arrive, sit at the grand piano, and within minutes, the atmosphere would transform. The chatter would quiet down, eyes would turn toward the stage, and everyone would lean forward, waiting to be carried away by music. It was magical, and she remembered how it used to make her heart race as a child, imagining herself playing and hearing people hold their breath for her performance. Tonight, however, there was an air of unease among the organizers. Lena noticed the coordinator whispering urgently into a phone, pacing near the back of the hall. Other staff exchanged worried glances. Something was wrong. Lena didn't need to ask. She could feel it. The way people moved, the tension in the room, the rapid whispers, it all meant trouble. The scheduled pianist had not arrived on time, or perhaps had called in at the last minute. She wasn't sure, but whatever it was, it meant the music, the centerpiece of the night, was in jeopardy. Lena's heart began to beat a little faster, not for the usual reasons, but for something she didn't fully understand yet. The piano sat there, untouched, waiting for someone to bring it to life. She could feel it calling her, softly, like a memory she had tried to bury. She shook her head, forcing herself to concentrate on her tray and the guests around her. She couldn't allow herself to think about it. It wasn't her role. She was a waitress, nothing more. The coordinator's voice rang out sharply, calling for suggestions, asking who might be able to fill in. One of the staff timidly suggested a local musician, but no one seemed to be available. Lena watched as tension rose. Conversations between organizers became hurried and worried. The atmosphere shifted from excitement to uncertainty. Guests began looking around, sensing the delay. A few murmurs passed through the crowd, and Lena noticed some glancing at the stage, curious and expectant. Her hands tightened around the tray. She had to breathe slowly to keep herself calm. Every instinct she had learned from years of working in these spaces kicked in. Stay composed. Stay professional. Don't let anyone notice the storm inside. And yet she felt it. The pull, the familiar whisper in her mind. You can do it. You know how. Lena almost ignored it, telling herself it was impossible. She hadn't played a real piano in years. Her fingers might be stiff. Her memory might fail. And even if she could play, who would allow it? She was just a waitress, someone invisible in the eyes of the guests. Yet the whisper persisted, growing stronger, as if the universe itself was nudging her. She looked at the grand piano again, its polished surface reflecting the chandeliers above, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The coordinator's voice broke through her thoughts. Does anyone know anyone who can play? Even a short piece? It was almost a plea, the desperation in her voice clear. Staff exchanged anxious glances. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she realized that the answer might be within her. She hesitated, terrified of speaking up. What if she failed? What if everyone left? What if she ruined the evening? Every fear she had buried over the years rose, like waves threatening to drown her. But something inside her refused to let the moment pass. The years of hiding her talent, of ignoring her dream, suddenly felt like they had led her to this point. She took a deep breath and, with a voice she tried to keep calm, said, "I can play." The room fell silent for a moment. Heads turned toward her. The coordinator's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Lena repeated herself, more confidently this time. "I can play the piano. I haven't played in a while, but I can manage a piece for the guests." There was a pause. Lena felt every second stretch into an eternity. She saw her coworkers exchanging uncertain looks. The coordinator frowned, trying to process what she had just heard. Guests, meanwhile, noticed the sudden quiet in the staff, but they didn't yet understand the tension. Lena felt the weight of every eye in the hall on her, even though most of the guests didn't know her name or face. It was a terrifying moment, and yet a strange sense of clarity washed over her. She knew she had to do this. After what felt like forever, the coordinator nodded slowly. "All right," she said, almost cautiously. "If you're sure." Lena nodded, swallowing her fear. Her heart pounded, her stomach churned, but there was determination there too. She couldn't let this chance slip away. It wasn't just about the guests or the music. It was about her, about proving to herself that she still had that spark, that talent, that passion waiting to be reignited. Lena set down her tray carefully, making sure not to spill a single glass. She moved toward the stage, each step heavy with anticipation. The guests murmured softly, curious about what was happening. She noticed a few staff members giving her encouraging nods, and that small gesture gave her strength. She climbed the steps to the piano, her hands brushing the polished wood. The keys seemed to welcome her, smooth and familiar under her fingertips. Memories of years past returned in flashes. The thrill of learning new pieces. The quiet satisfaction of perfecting a melody. the joy of losing herself in sound. She sat down, took a deep breath, and looked out at the crowd. The room seemed enormous, filled with people who were sophisticated, wealthy, important. For a moment, fear threatened to take over. But then she remembered the whispered encouragement from within. You can do it. You were meant for this. She straightened her back, positioned her hands over the keys, and prepared to play dot as she touched the first note. A hush fell over the hall. People leaned in, curiosity and surprise mingling in the air. They didn't know who she was, or why she was sitting at the piano in a waitress uniform, but they could sense that something unusual was about to happen. Lena's fingers moved, slowly at first, testing the keys. The sound was soft but clear. She smiled to herself, a tiny spark of confidence igniting. She remembered the movements, the melodies, the patterns. It was all still there, tucked away, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The first few notes carried across the room, gentle and deliberate. Guests looked around, unsure at first, then gradually focused their attention on her. The whispers and chatter faded, replaced by the sound of the piano filling the space. Lena's body relaxed as she played, her hands moving fluidly over the keys. The music was alive, resonant, and full of emotion. She had been waiting years for this, and now, in this unexpected moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. The music had just ended, and the room was alive with applause. Lena stood for a moment, frozen, barely believing what had just happened. The sound of clapping, cheers, and murmurs of amazement surrounded her. People she had served without a word before were now looking directly at her, their faces reflecting surprise, admiration, and a newfound respect. Her hands were still slightly trembling from the piano, and her heart was racing faster than it had in years. For a moment, she felt light-headed, as if the weight of months and years of hidden longing had been lifted off her shoulders all at once. Her manager appeared beside her, a mixture of shock and relief on his face. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "That was extraordinary. You didn't just fill in you. You amazed everyone." Lena smiled faintly, unsure what words could explain the mix of fear, excitement, and pride she felt. She had performed, but this wasn't just about playing a piano piece. It was about stepping into herself, reclaiming a part of her that she had buried for too long. And the realization that she had done it successfully was almost overwhelming. Her coworkers gathered slowly around her, whispering words of encouragement and admiration. Some were genuinely impressed, others slightly embarrassed that they had ever underestimated her. One of them chuckled quietly, shaking their head. "I didn't know you could do that." "No one did." Lena nodded, feeling a quiet sense of vindication. For years, she had been invisible, overlooked, and underestimated, but in this one moment, she had become impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the guests were still talking in hushed tones. Many had pulled out their phones, recording snippets of the performance, their eyes wide with surprise. Some of them whispered to each other, expressing disbelief that a waitress in her uniform could have such incredible skill. They had expected a professional musician, someone they might have recognized or at least assumed had years of training. Instead, they had been given a genuine surprise. Raw talent coming from someone they had never even noticed before. The coordinator approached Lena again, still wide-eyed. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice both concerned and amazed. That was more than anyone could have hoped for. "The guests are still talking about it." Lena nodded, feeling her pulse slow just slightly. She was okay. She was more than okay. She was alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She realized that the fear she had felt before performing had not disappeared, but it had transformed. It had become courage, energy, and determination. But as the initial shock faded, Lena also noticed the practical side of the situation. The evening was far from over. There were still tables to serve, drinks to carry, orders to take. She was still a waitress, and the event was still unfolding. The stark contrast between the stage, where she had just been the center of attention, and the floor where she had to move quietly among guests, was almost surreal. She carried her tray again, carefully navigating through the crowd, but now the attention followed her in a subtle way. Guests who had ignored her before now nodded, smiled, or even paused to whisper compliments. A small child sitting at one of the tables stared at her wide-eyed. "Did you just play that piano?" the child asked, pointing at her with awe. Lena smiled softly and nodded. "Yes," she said quietly, not wanting to draw too much attention, but still savoring the moment. The child's eyes sparkled with amazement, and Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was what she had missed: the connection, the joy, the ability to touch people's hearts without saying a word. Meanwhile, back near the stage, the grand piano still gleamed under the lights. Lena couldn't help but glance at it from time to time. The temptation to return to it was strong, a silent call she felt deep in her soul. But the evening had rules, schedules, and expectations. She couldn't just sit down and play whenever she wanted. And yet, she realized something important. It didn't matter if the piano wasn't hers permanently. Didn't matter if she wasn't a professional recognized by the world. The moment she had seized, the courage she had shown, had proven that her talent was real and alive. The staff had begun to whisper among themselves about what had just happened. Some were excited, talking about how incredible it was that a waitress had taken the stage and stunned the audience. Others were cautious, wondering how this would reflect on the venue. But the general consensus was clear. Lena had transformed the mood of the entire evening. What had started as a minor panic over a missing performer had turned into a highlight, something the guests would remember for months, if not years. The energy in the room had shifted in a way that no one could ignore. Guests began approaching Lena cautiously, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. A few asked her questions about her training, her background, and how long it had been since she last played publicly. She answered quietly, careful not to exaggerate or draw unnecessary attention to herself. "I used to play when I was younger," she said simply. "It's been a while, but I never stopped loving it." The honesty in her voice resonated with the listeners, and she noticed the genuine admiration in their eyes. They weren't impressed by bravado or showmanship. They were impressed by skill, courage, and authenticity. Some of the musicians at the event had approached her as well, curious and eager to meet the person who had delivered such an unexpected performance. One older pianist, who had been watching from the back, smiled warmly and extended a hand. "You have talent," he said, his tone respectful and sincere. "Not many people can step in under pressure and play like that. Keep it alive. Don't let it fade again." Lena felt a lump in her throat. Hearing encouragement from someone she respected, someone whose life had been dedicated to music, made the moment feel even more real. It was a validation she hadn't realized she needed. Yet, amid the praise and admiration, Lena also felt a wave of self-doubt creeping back in. What if she had been lucky? What if this was a one-time moment, and she would never be able to do it again? What if people expected more next time, and she couldn't deliver? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts. These fears were familiar, old companions from years of doubt. But the memory of the applause, the smiles, the eyes that had widened in amazement, reminded her that she had done this once. She could do it again. And this time she wouldn't hide. The evening continued, and Lena returned to her duties, carrying trays and attending to tables as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The way she moved, the way she held herself, the quiet confidence that had been missing for so long, it was all there now. She noticed guests looking at her differently, giving small nods of recognition, even whispering to each other about the waitress who played piano. She didn't seek attention, but she felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her presence was being noticed in a way it never had before. As the night wore on, Lena's mind wandered back to the years she had spent hiding her talent, pretending it didn't matter. She thought about the countless hours of practice she had given up, the moments when she had told herself it was impossible to pursue music, and the fear that had kept her silent. And now, in one unexpected moment, all of that had been turned around. She realized that life sometimes gives chances in the most unexpected ways, and that courage, even when it feels terrifying, can create moments that change everything. During a brief break, Lena stepped away from the floor and leaned against a wall near the stage. She let herself breathe, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb, replaced by a warm sense of accomplishment. Her hands were still tingling from the piano, her fingers remembering movements that had been dormant for years. She thought about how she had almost not spoken up, almost let fear hold her back. And she silently promised herself that she would never let such a chance pass again. Meanwhile, guests continued to talk about the performance, sharing their surprise and delight with each other. The story of the waitress who could play piano was spreading quickly through the hall, whispered among tables, carried across the room, and noticed by everyone present. Lena overheard fragments of conversation, and each one made her smile quietly. She didn't need the attention for validation. It was enough to know that her music had touched people, that it had brought a moment of beauty and surprise into their evening. Her coworkers continued to support her quietly, helping with trays, clearing tables, and making sure she could take small moments to recover. Some of them expressed curiosity about her talent, asking her if she had ever considered pursuing it professionally. Lena shook her head, smiling. "It's just a passion," she said softly. "I never thought it would lead to something like this." The truth was, she had never believed it could. And now, after this night, everything felt possible. As the gala reached its peak, Lena realized that the world had shifted slightly under her feet. The people who had overlooked her, the guests who had barely noticed her presence, the staff who had underestimated her, all of them had seen her in a new light. And more importantly, she had seen herself differently. The quiet waitress who had worked long hours, served endless tables, and hidden her dreams was no longer just that. She was someone capable of extraordinary things. Someone who could step forward when it mattered most. Someone whose talent and courage could change the mood of an entire room. The night began to wind down, and guests slowly started leaving. A night had taken on a new energy, one that was almost electric. Lena had returned to her duties after her performance, but she couldn't ignore the way people kept looking at her, whispering and pointing subtly toward the piano. It was as if she had become the invisible center of attention, the person everyone was quietly curious about. The applause and admiration she had received were still fresh in her mind, and she felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. She had done it, yet she also knew that the world had shifted its expectations of her in that instant. She had been brave enough to step up once, but what came next could be just as important. As Lena moved through the hall with her tray, she noticed that the atmosphere had changed in subtle ways. Guests who had been distracted by their conversations were now paying attention to her presence. Waiters who had previously treated her like anyone else were now watching her, their eyes reflecting a combination of respect and amazement. Even the coordinators and managers seemed to treat her differently, giving her small nods and subtle gestures of encouragement as she passed. It was a strange sensation, being both the same person and yet someone entirely new in the eyes of others. In the corner of the room, Lena noticed a group of important guests leaning toward each other, talking in low voices, their eyes flicking repeatedly toward the piano and toward her. She could catch bits of their conversation. Did you see her play? Incredible. I've never expected that from someone in her position. She should be performing professionally. The words hit her softly, like gentle waves brushing against her, filling her with a mixture of disbelief and quiet satisfaction. She had performed, and people noticed, but more than that, they had been genuinely moved. That feeling, the realization that her music had touched people, was intoxicating. Meanwhile, Lena's hands ached slightly from the previous performance. Her fingers had moved rapidly, her body had been tense with concentration, and her heart had pounded with nervous anticipation. Yet the ache was not unpleasant. It was a reminder that she had done something extraordinary, something she hadn't attempted in years. The memory of her childhood, of sitting in front of a piano in a small community center, came rushing back. She had loved the instrument then, and she loved it still. Even though life had forced her to put that dream aside for so long, the coordinator approached her once again, this time with a more determined expression. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice slightly so only Lena could hear. "You did amazing. But the original pianist isn't coming tonight, and the guests are asking for more. Could you play again? Just for a few more pieces?" Lena froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. The first performance had been a surprise, a brave moment born of necessity. She hadn't thought about what would happen after. But now, with everyone waiting, with eyes on her, she had a choice to make. She hesitated, her mind racing. Fear whispered that she might fail, that she might disappoint everyone if she tried again. But the part of her that had loved music all her life, the part that had been quietly waiting for this exact moment, spoke louder. This was her chance. This was not just about a single performance. This was about reclaiming a part of herself that she had long thought lost. She nodded slowly, trying to steady her breathing. "I can do it," she said, her voice soft but determined. The coordinator's eyes widened with relief and encouragement. "Thank you," she said quickly, stepping back to allow Lena space. "Take your time. The guests are going to love this." Lena moved toward the stage once more, her uniform rustling softly as she climbed the steps. She paused for a moment at the piano, running her fingers lightly over the polished surface. The keys gleamed under the lights, reflecting the chandeliers above. For a brief second, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel the anticipation and the weight of the moment settle around her. This was her world now, even if only for a short while. When she sat down at the piano, Lena could feel every pair of eyes in the room on her. The initial murmurs of curiosity quieted almost instantly. People leaned forward, sensing the beginning of something extraordinary. Lena placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar coolness beneath her touch. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself focus, letting the memories of countless hours of practice and passion return. The fear remained, but it was accompanied by a steady pulse of excitement, a knowledge that she could rise to this challenge. The first note resonated through the hall, soft and deliberate. Lena allowed herself to settle into the rhythm, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. The music began slowly, a gentle melody that wove through the room, filling the air with emotion and nuance. Guests paused mid-conversation, turning toward the sound, their expressions shifting from casual interest to genuine wonder. Lena's body relaxed, her breathing syncing with the flow of the music, and she felt a sense of calm determination. This was what she had always loved, the ability to convey emotion without words, to create a moment that belonged entirely to sound and feeling. As she played, the room seemed to transform. The chatter faded, the laughter and casual conversation muted beneath the power of the piano. Guests were leaning in, their attention fully captured. Some had tears in their eyes, others had smiles of awe on their faces. Every note that Lena played carried a story, a feeling, a piece of herself that she had kept hidden for years. She had imagined this moment countless times as a child, but now, with the chandelier lights reflecting off the polished wood and the gaze of the audience upon her, it felt more real than anything she had ever known. The music grew in confidence and complexity as Lena allowed herself to fully embrace the performance. Her fingers moved faster, more assuredly, as if they remembered everything she had ever learned and more. Each chord carried weight. Each melody line told a story. The audience was captivated, completely unaware of anything else in the room. For a moment, Lena felt as if time had stopped. The world beyond the piano ceased to exist. It was just her, the keys beneath her fingers, and the sound filling the hall. Some guests whispered to each other, unable to contain their amazement. "I can't believe she's doing this," one said. "She's incredible." Another added, "Who knew a waitress could play like that?" Lena didn't hear the comments. She was too focused, too absorbed in the music. But she could feel the energy in the room, the collective awe, and it fueled her performance even more. Every note seemed to resonate not just through the hall, but through her entire being. She had been invisible for so long, but now, with each melody, she was impossible to ignore. As she continued to play, Lena noticed subtle changes in her own confidence. She had begun this performance with caution, aware of her fears and limitations. But now, as the audience's reaction grew more intense, she felt a sense of freedom. She was no longer the quiet, unseen waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, a force capable of moving people without a single word. Every chord she struck was a statement, a declaration of her talent and her courage. And in that moment, she realized that she had never truly stopped being a musician. She had only paused, waiting for the right time to return. The performance continued, blending slow, gentle passages with faster, more intricate sections. Lena allowed herself to improvise slightly, to explore the music in a way she hadn't done in years. The audience responded instinctively, leaning in closer, eyes wide with wonder, smiles spreading across faces. Some guests lifted their phones to capture the moment, while others simply watched, captivated by the raw talent unfolding before them. Lena felt an almost overwhelming sense of connection, as if the music was a bridge between her world and theirs, a language that transcended social status, expectations, and assumptions. As the piece drew to a close, Lena slowed her tempo, allowing the final notes to linger in the air like a soft echo. She lifted her hands from the keys, and for a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then, as if released from a spell, the audience erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, filling the hall with clapping, cheers, and whistles of admiration. Lena's heart raced, her chest swelling with a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had done it. She had played not once, but twice in one evening, and the effect had been more profound than she could have imagined. The coordinator rushed to her side, eyes bright with excitement. "That was unbelievable," she exclaimed. "The guests can't stop talking about it. They want more. I don't even know how to thank you." Lena smiled, still catching her breath. "It was nothing," she said quietly, though she knew it had been everything. In truth, it had been the most important moment of her life so far. A turning point she hadn't expected, but had embraced fully. Guests began approaching Lena, their expressions filled with admiration and curiosity. Many asked about her background, how long she had been playing, and whether she had performed professionally. Lena answered simply, humbly, explaining that she had learned as a child and had not pursued a formal career in music. Yet the sincerity in her voice and the evident talent in her hands spoke louder than any words. People nodded, some shaking their heads in amazement, others smiling with genuine appreciation. She had captured their attention, not with flamboyance or showmanship, but with skill, passion, and authenticity. As the evening continued, Lena realized something. The applause still echoed in Lena's ears as she stepped back from the piano. Her fingers tingled from the movement, her shoulders ached slightly, and her chest was still racing with adrenaline. She had performed not once, but twice, under the eyes of people who never expected her to be more than a quiet waitress. And yet, here she was, standing in the middle of an Upscale gala, realizing that everything had changed in ways she could hardly believe. Guests began to stir, whispering among themselves, still trying to process what they had just heard. Some were walking to the bar, still murmuring about the performance. Others lingered near their tables, discussing the talent they had witnessed. A few approached Lena directly, their expressions full of admiration. "I can't believe you played like that," one woman said, eyes wide. "You're incredible." Lena smiled quietly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The words were genuine, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself feel proud. Another guest, an older man with a kind expression, stepped forward. "Do you perform professionally?" he asked politely. Lena shook her head, keeping her response simple. "No, I'm just a waitress," she said softly, not wanting to boast, even though part of her wanted to shout to the world, "Yes, I am more than that." The man nodded, seemingly impressed by her humility as well as her skill. "Well," he said with a smile, "if you ever consider it, the world would be lucky to hear you." Lena nodded, tucking the compliment into the corner of her mind like a treasure she would carry with her always. As she moved back to resume her duties, Lena realized that the attention she was receiving was not fleeting. Guests were still watching her, talking about her performance, and showing a level of respect that she had never encountered before. Even the staff, who had worked alongside her for months, were looking at her differently. Some smiled quietly, others whispered encouragement, and a few approached her with questions about how she had learned to play. Lena answered patiently, enjoying the conversation in a way she hadn't allowed herself to enjoy anything at work before. The pianist who had been scheduled to perform that evening had not arrived, and the organizers were still scrambling to adjust the rest of the entertainment. The coordinator, seeing Lena's ability to captivate the audience, suggested that she play a few more pieces. Lena hesitated. She had already given so much energy, and she was not a professional performer. But when she looked around at the faces in the audience, at the expressions of awe and admiration, something inside her stirred. She realized that the moment was not about proving herself to anyone else. It was about embracing who she truly was. Even in the smallest way, Lena returned to the piano, this time with a quiet determination. The guests, sensing that something more was about to happen, leaned forward in anticipation. The hall had grown quieter, the murmurs fading into silence as she placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar connection she had always had with the instrument. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her all these years, and now, at last, she was returning home. She began to play slowly, gently at first, allowing the notes to flow naturally. The melody was soft, delicate, filled with emotion that she hadn't expressed in years. She could feel the room responding, the energy shifting as the guests leaned closer, captivated by the unexpected performance. Lena's heart was pounding, but it was no longer fear. It was excitement, joy, and a deep sense of fulfillment. She was not just playing music, she was telling a story, sharing a part of herself that had been hidden for far too long. As the piece grew, Lena allowed herself to move more freely, letting the music flow without restraint. The notes became stronger, more confident, carrying a sense of passion and life that filled the entire hall. Guests were transfixed. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled with awe and appreciation. The quiet whispers had disappeared, replaced by a shared focus on the music. Lena could sense that she was no longer just performing. She was connecting with every person in the room, reaching into their hearts with something honest, beautiful, and unexpected. A few guests had their phones out, capturing the performance. Lena didn't mind. She was not performing for fame or recognition. She was performing because it was the first time in years that she had allowed herself to do something she truly loved. And the response from the audience was more than she could have hoped for. It was proof that even the smallest actions, taken with courage and authenticity, could create moments that touched people in ways that words could not. The music flowed seamlessly from one piece to another. Lena's fingers moved with confidence and precision, remembering patterns, chords, and melodies she had learned years ago. There was a freedom in the improvisation, a joy that she hadn't felt in a long time. Each note was deliberate, expressive, and alive, carrying her own emotions, as well as the silent stories of every guest who had paused to listen. She felt a sense of unity with the audience, as if the music had created an invisible bond, a shared experience that connected them in ways nothing else could. As she continued, Lena noticed a few children in the audience, leaning forward, their eyes wide with wonder. Some were mimicking the movements of her fingers, as if trying to understand how such beautiful sounds could come from a single set of keys. One small boy whispered to his mother, "I want to play like her." The mother smiled, ruffling his hair gently, but Lena caught the words and felt a warmth spread through her heart. It reminded her of herself, years ago, sitting in a small community center and dreaming of performing on a real piano. She had been given the chance to inspire others, just as she had once been inspired. Guests began approaching her after the next piece, offering compliments, encouragement, and even requests for advice. Some were musicians themselves, curious about her training and her approach. Others were simply attendees, amazed that someone they had seen walking quietly among them could possess such skill. Lena answered each question with patience, humility, and honesty. She didn't boast, didn't exaggerate, and didn't seek to impress. Her authenticity was part of what made her performance so powerful, and people responded to it naturally. Even the coordinator, who had been stressed earlier about the missing performer, was now smiling broadly. She approached Lena once more, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've done something remarkable tonight," she said softly. "I don't know how we could have managed this without you. You've not only saved the evening, you've transformed it. The guests will never forget this." Lena smiled, feeling a sense of validation that went beyond simple praise. It wasn't about recognition. It was about the realization that her passion, her talent, and her courage had created something lasting. The applause and admiration continued throughout the evening. Lena returned to the piano whenever the coordinator allowed, playing short pieces that carried the hall through the rest of the gala. Each time she sat down, she felt the same mix of nerves, excitement, and joy. She realized that the fear she had carried for years had been replaced by confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet certainty that she was capable, skilled, and worthy of attention. She had stepped out of the shadows and into a light she had almost forgotten existed. Guests began approaching her with requests for photographs, conversations, and even offers for future performances. Lena accepted politely, but she felt careful not to let the attention overwhelm her. She had not sought fame, and she didn't need it. What mattered most was the connection, the ability to share her gift and see the impact it had on others. Every smile, every tear, every nod of appreciation was a reminder that she had been given a rare opportunity to touch lives, even in a small way. As the evening drew to a close, Lena noticed that the hall had transformed. The air was no longer just filled with chatter and clinking glasses. It was alive with the memory of music, with stories shared silently between her and the guests who had listened. People were leaving with smiles on their faces, talking excitedly about the performance they had witnessed. Staff members lingered, talking quietly among themselves about the waitress who could play, and Lena felt a quiet pride in knowing that her talent had left a lasting impression at the end of the night. Lena returned to the piano one last time. She placed her hands gently on the keys, not to perform for anyone else, but for herself. She allowed herself to play a simple, soft melody, a quiet reflection of the joy, relief, and wonder she had experienced throughout the evening. It was a personal moment, a way to honor her own journey and the rediscovery of a part of herself she had nearly lost. The sound filled the empty hall, echoing softly, and she closed her eyes, letting the music carry her through the memories, the dreams, and the hope she now felt alive within her. When she finally stood, she felt a sense of completion. The night had been extraordinary in ways she had never imagined. She had stepped forward when it mattered most, faced her fears, and shared her talent with the world. And in doing so, she had discovered something deeper, a renewed sense of self, a reminder that courage and passion could transform not just a single evening, but the way she saw herself and the possibilities ahead. The guests left the hall with a sense of wonder, still talking quietly about the unexpected performance. Staff members lingered, some shaking their heads in amazement, others smile. The gala had ended, but the memory of the evening lingered in every corner of the hall. Lena walked slowly toward the exit, her uniform slightly rumpled from a long night of work, her hands still tingling from the piano, and her heart full of emotions she could hardly describe. Outside, the air was cool and crisp, a contrast to the warmth and excitement she had experienced inside. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath and letting the night settle around her. She felt different, lighter, freer, as if something that had been hidden for years had finally been uncovered. Her thoughts wandered back to the performance, the way the guests had looked at her, the applause, the smiles, and even the tears. She remembered the child who had whispered, "I want to play like her," and the older pianist who had encouraged her to keep her talent alive. Each memory carried a spark, a reminder that she had touched people's hearts, even if just for a few minutes. The feeling was exhilarating, a mixture of pride, relief, and wonder. She had stepped into a moment that had seemed impossible, and she had risen to it. Lena continued walking down the quiet street, replaying the night in her mind. The gala had been more than an event. It had been a turning point. For years, she had worked in the background, unnoticed, with dreams and talents she had hidden away. She had told herself that music was something for other people, something she could no longer pursue because life had different plans. And yet, in a single evening, all of that had changed. She realized that talent and passion cannot truly be hidden forever. They wait quietly for the right moment to emerge, and when they do, they can transform everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from one of the organizers, a simple text that said, "You were amazing tonight. Thank you for saving the gala. Guests are still talking about you. We should discuss more performances soon." Lena smiled softly as she read the message. She had never sought recognition or fame, but the words carried a sense of validation she had not realized she needed. It was a reminder that stepping forward, even in fear, could lead to opportunities she had never imagined as she reached the small apartment she called home. Lena reflected on how her life might change after tonight. She had no illusions that everything would suddenly become easy, or that the world would immediately recognize her talent. But she felt something even more valuable, a renewed belief in herself. She had faced fear, embraced her passion, and shared her gift with the world, and that was a victory in itself. No one could take that away from her. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Word of her performance had spread quickly, not only among the guests, but through social media and local news outlets. People who had attended the gala posted videos, shared stories, and commented on how an unexpected performer had stolen the show. Lena watched it all with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had gone to work that evening as a waitress, and now people were calling her talent extraordinary, inspiring, and unbelievable. It was surreal, but she welcomed it quietly, without letting it overwhelm her. Her manager approached her one afternoon at work, a serious yet supportive look on his face. "I've been hearing a lot about you," he said, "not just from the guests, but from the staff as well. I want you to know that we're proud of you. If you want to pursue music further, we'll support you." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected such encouragement from anyone in her workplace. She nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement. For the first time, she realized that she didn't have to choose between her work and her passion. She could find a way to embrace both, to let music become a part of her life again. Over the next few weeks, Lena began to explore opportunities she had never considered before. She received invitations to play at smaller events, private gatherings, and local venues. Each performance was a chance to grow, to refine her skill, and to share her music with people who genuinely appreciated it. She approached each opportunity with humility and dedication, remembering the lessons of that first gala. It wasn't about fame or applause. It was about connection, expression, and the joy of doing something she loved. Lena also found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the years of practice she had devoted to music, the moments when she had doubted herself, and the choices that had led her to become a waitress instead of pursuing a professional career. She realized that none of that time had been wasted. Every note she had played, every melody she had learned, every small moment of dedication had prepared her for tonight. Life had given her a delay, not a denial. And now she was ready to step into her potential at home. Lena often spent hours at her own piano, rediscovering old pieces, improvising, and experimenting with new melodies. The instrument felt alive under her fingers, a familiar companion that had waited patiently for her return. Music became her refuge, her joy, and her source of confidence. Each note reminded her of the gala, of the people she had touched, and of the courage she had discovered within herself. It was a reminder that even when life seems to keep you in the background, there is always a way to step forward and shine. As she gained more experience performing for different audiences, Lena noticed changes not only in her skill, but also in her self-perception. She no longer doubted her abilities or questioned her worth. She had faced fear, embraced opportunity, and shared her talent, and in doing so, she had discovered that courage and authenticity could create moments of magic. She carried this lesson with her into every performance, every interaction, and every decision she made. Life had shown her that stepping forward, even when uncertain, could open doors she never imagined. One evening, Lena was invited to perform at another Upscale event, similar to the gala that had changed her life. As she prepared, she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves, but this time, the fear was different. It was no longer paralyzing. It was energizing. She knew that she could rise to the challenge, and she welcomed it. When she walked into the hall, the guests greeted her warmly, many recognizing her from the previous gala. The atmosphere was filled with anticipation, and Lena felt a sense of calm focus as she approached the piano. As she played, the music flowed naturally, effortlessly, and with a depth of emotion that came from her lived experiences. She felt connected to every listener, every note carrying a story, every chord a reflection of her journey. The audience responded with awe and admiration, just as they had the first time, but now Lena felt a deeper sense of purpose. She was not just performing. She was sharing a part of herself, inspiring others, and proving to herself that talent, courage, and perseverance could create meaningful moments in the world. After the performance, a young girl approached her, wide-eyed and smiling. "I want to play piano like you," she said softly. Lena knelt down to speak with her, offering encouragement and advice. "Start small," she said gently. "Practice every day and never be afraid to share your music. It's not about being perfect. It's about feeling the music and sharing it with others." The girl nodded eagerly, and Lena felt a wave of pride and connection. She remembered herself at that age, dreaming and practicing quietly, and she realized that the opportunity to inspire someone else was as important as the applause she had received. In the weeks and months that followed, Lena continued to perform, both professionally and for smaller, more intimate gatherings. Her reputation grew, but she remained humble, focusing on the joy of music rather than the accolades. She found balance between her work as a waitress and her performances, understanding that each role enriched the other. Her confidence and self-respect grew, and she began to see life in a new way, full of possibilities, full of moments waiting to be seized, full of the potential to touch others in meaningful ways. Lena also reconnected with her old mentors and teachers, sharing her journey and seeking guidance as she refined her skills. They were amazed at her growth and proud of what she had accomplished. Each lesson and conversation reminded her that talent alone was not enough. Courage, perseverance, and the willingness to take risks were equally important. She had learned this lesson in the most powerful way possible, through experience, through stepping into the unknown, and through embracing her true self. One quiet evening, Lena sat at her piano alone in her apartment, reflecting on how far she had come. She thought about the gala, the applause, the people she had inspired, and the journey that had brought her here. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She had discovered herself, reclaimed her passion, and created a path that was uniquely her own. And in that moment, she realized that the life she had once thought was ordinary and limited was now full of possibility, purpose, and beauty. Lena played a simple, flowing melody, letting each note carry her emotions and her gratitude. The music filled the room, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She thought about the people she had touched, the courage she had found, and the dreams she had dared to pursue. And she knew that her journey was only beginning. The world was no longer a place where she stood in the background. It was a place where she could step forward, create, inspire, and live fully as the person she had always been meant to be. The piano became a symbol of her journey, a reminder that talent, courage, and perseverance